presyo.
Daming-dami ng asukal. Ang problema po, nasa retail. Doon ang problema. It's government's problem on how to implement the SRP.
Meanwhile, the Samahang Industriya ng Agrikultura doesn't see a problem as long as the imported sugar arrives staggered within several months.
If the whole volume of 64,000 metric ton come in January, we have some problem because of our farmers still harvesting in first part of January.
Government is ordering the immediate importation of refined sugar to help stabilize its price amid inflation. But sugar farmers and producers are puzzled by the move. They say production is in full swing and there should be no problem with supply by now. So why are sugar prices still high? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama natin ngayon sa studio dito sa Mandaluyong Ed Linggao of One News. And online, she's joining us from Manila, Ami Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star. Chiefs, happy Thursday.
Good evening.
Happy Thursday. Anong balita, Ami?
Pasko muna, 3 days to Christmas. Hahaba yung holiday natin, April 26, December 26 hanggang Monday yung holiday. Non-working.
Okay. Anong natin? Tawag din ko sa'yo, natin.
Si Ami, hindi nag-holiday yan.
Holiday nila. At saka iniimbita ni President Marcos and First Lady Lisa ang mga tao, tingnan daw yung decoration sa Malacanang and you will get a free puto bongbong. Oh.
Yan talaga ang branding, ha?
Puto bongbong.
Okay, sige. Sige, Christmas, talaga namang yun ang inaano. But not to shatter the Christmas spirit kasi sa traffic sa labas, kita mo naman, people are excited about Christmas. Pero ano pa mga balita natin na wag natin dapat makaligtaan din?
Yun yung introduction. Well, yun na naman, nag-aaway na naman dyan sa West Philippine Sea, no? Ang Beijing na mismo nagsalita, hindi daw totoo yung impormasyon na nagko-construction silang panibago. Although, syempre, kailangan inuwan siya mga definition niya. Ano? Yun ang word from Beijing today.
Pero, I mean, Ed, what is our latest understanding on the situation ba sa South China Sea?
It depends on what we're referring to. Ang nasa report ng Bloomberg is sand decay, which is a high tide feature, mga 4 nautical miles lang from Pag-asa Island. So, malapit lang yun. Yun ang sasabi ng Bloomberg na may apparent, hindi naman construction pero may apparent changes doon sa ano.
And that would change the quote-unquote the status quo, the baseline.
That will also change the status
of that feature.
Because once it becomes a high tide elevation, it becomes a rock.
A high tide elevation means kahit high tide, above water pa rin.
Kumaga parang siyang isla, pero hindi siya isla kasi hindi siya nakapagano ng...
So doon mo na ngayon bibilagin yung 200...
Hindi. Walang easy yan. As a rock, it's entitled to a 12 nautical mile territorial waters.
Territorial?
Oo. Ibabangga yan that
mag-overlap
with Pag-asa Island, which is just 4 nautical miles away. So whoever takes control of that rock, which is sand decay, will effectively reduce yung...
Well, what are the alternative definitions or context here? Sinabi mo nga, it depends on how you look at it. That's one way of looking at it. What are the other...
I think kasi is ang sabi ng China, no, we're not doing anything with sand decay. It's the Vietnamese. But it's also possible that they were referring to sand cay.
Iba pa yun?
Iba pa yun. It's also in the Spratlys. It is controlled by the Vietnamese. In fact, they already have several structures there. May malaking lighthouse doon sa Sand Cay, which is also called Bailan Island. That's to the southeast naman of ano.
So just to be clear, isang letra yung difference nito.
Sandy versus Sand.
But it's referring to a different place.
Different place and different owner.
Sige. Okay. Anyway, we will have to discuss that even further. But for now, we'll bring in our first guest. We'll talk about sugar. After a quick break, the Chiefs will be right back.
Good evening po, Sir Cosculluela. Paon na po ng mic. Pagbalik po natin, segment mo na po, sir.
Kamusta ang sound?
Okay sir, malinaw naman po.
Okay, sige. Sige.
Is there manipulation at play in the prices and supply of sugar in the Philippines? Let's speak with former Sugar Regulatory Administration Chief Lito Cosculluela. Mr. Cosculluela is also advisor to the Confederation of Sugarcane Farmers. Welcome to the Chiefs, Mr. Cosculluela.
Evening po.
Magandang gabi po.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, good evening.
Magandang gabi po. Sir, kanina kausap ko sa Big Story, Mr. Lamata of UNIFED, and he was saying that apart from there not being a shortage, he was saying that actually if you look at what's in storage right now, and if you look at the harvest season where we're entering, and that should be running until into early next year, sobra. He's saying, in effect, it's not just adequate supply. There is potentially a glut if that were actually to make it to market. I don't want to quote the data because I might be misquoting the figures, and I don't want to misquote that. But basically, is the data that you're seeing painting the same picture?
Yes, exactly. There is sugar at this point in time. Existing inventory is probably good for about 2 months, not counting the sugar that's coming in because of peak milling. So there is sugar at this time, importation, and in fact, the proposed importation of under MAV or minimum volume makes no sense at all. I don't know if is aware the tariff on MAV emission is 50% in quota, and that will bring the landed cost of sugar imports through MAV to prices that are almost the same as the current prevailing prices in a local market. So it makes no sense to make that importation.
Okay, we'll get to the importation order later on. First, if you could help us make sense muna on the basic question of people that if there is no supply problem, then why are prices still so high?
That's exactly what we've been harping on over the last month or so. The current retail prices not reflect the current buying prices mill gate. You know, when you buy sugar mill gate, that means the price going to the producer at 3,000 pesos, which is tonight. That translates to about 80 pesos per kilo on the retail market. The question is, how come prices are still at 95 to 105 pesos per kilo of refined in the retail outlets? Clearly, someone or some people are making a huge profit, and it is not the producers who are benefiting from this. So we've already been a letter saying that government must pension to the bill prices because are not reasonable.
Well, sir, I think that's really interesting that you put it that way. Pero sir, if you don't mind, I'll back up a bit. Kasi you're saying 80 pesos dapat yung retail price given the mill gate price. But on the other hand, as of last year, around the same time
Yes.
last year, the retail prices were what? 56, 57 at the most. Per kilo. That's a difference of almost 30 pesos per kilo. I'm wondering lang what accounts for this huge difference between last year's price and your projected retail price. I know there's been some talk about yung mga storms and the effect of the storms on the harvest and on the crops. Pero does that account for 30 peso difference?
Ed, we need to the cost of production has risen tremendously. In fact, at today's current mill gate prices, there are producers who worry that they may not be able to meet as prices continue to go up, meaning production costs. So the increase in price compared to last year reflects current inflation of practically everything, include especially the cost of production. So the prices of 3,000 more or less per bag reflects, I think, return for producers as long as prices or production costs do not continue going up.
Mr. Cosculluela, we've been trying to reconcile
Yes.
nga bakit iba-iba yung sinasabi ng producer sa yung mga ano. We also talked to the Supermarket Association. Sabi nila mataas daw ang kuha nila from the wholesalers. Ano naman kaya yung mga input na napalaki dun sa mga wholesalers?
Well,
Kasakali lang sa kanila yung tama nung malaking jump in the price.
Okay. I think what needs to be done is for the DTI, together with the Department of Agriculture and SRA, to trace the value chain. They're buying sugar for 3,000 pesos per bag from producers' mill gate. What happens from the mill to the retail outlets is not, we have nothing to do with it. Producers have nothing to do with it. No? So you're looking at distributor, repackers, and retailers. Each one measured in. So you're looking at mill gate price plus the cost of handling, transport, trader's margin, repacking, packers margin, retail's margin, final cost to the consumer. So to make it easy to compute, if today's buying price 3,000 mill gate, add about 1,000 pesos to cover all the other costs, including margins, profit margin. So that would price total cost to 4,000 pesos. Divided by 50, that's 80 pesos. So at today's current mill gate price, the double retail price ought to be 80 pesos per kilo refined.
Sa standard procedure, Mr. Cosculluela, ginagawa ba yan ng government natin? Whichever agency should be in charge, whether Department of Agriculture or DTI, ginagawa ba yung yung pagmamonitor along the value chain of something as basic as sugar, no?
Yes.
Ginagawa ba yun?
Yes.
Standard.
There is a price monitoring council headed by DTI. In fact, when I was SRA administrator, the DTI would call us and the price would be more than 2 pesos over the suggested retail price, asking for an explanation. And we would explain where the costs were coming from. So I think it is the duty of the DTI together with the two other agencies to monitor what's going on, to find out what the actual costs are, and to determine suggested retail price today.
This is something that Unified was also saying. For them, they say, let's look at the SRP and the implementation of the SRP. Is there anything complicated with that? I mean, it seems a very straightforward proposition and suggestion. What is the difficulty there?
I work problems is there is a lack of earnest dialogue between government and the stakeholders in the industry. That also applies to all the other agriculture sectors. They've said exactly the same thing. There is a lack of dialogue between government and stakeholders, and therefore problems like this do not get resolved quickly, not talking to each other. And you know, the industry can point out all the cost sources so that the DA, the SRDTI can establish a reasonable suggested retail price. All we need to do is talk to each other.
This is the information among stakeholders and the entire ecosystem as it's being produced in the private sector, in the farming sector, and so on. But I want to talk about the public sector and the government in particular. The President is concurrently the Secretary of Agriculture. He's authorizing, in effect, this importation of 64,000 metric tons, notwithstanding everything that we just talked about, that the supply is there and the prices should be this much and so on. Are you confident that the President, the Secretary of Agriculture, is receiving the right information at his level?
I have my doubts. In fact, we sent a copy of the issued by 3 federations through Federation of Free Farmers, and they've sent a copy of this to USEC Paniban with the request that the President be given a copy of that, so that they are probably properly apprised about the situation, that it is relatively easy to resolve this issue if we sit down together, government and industry, so that we will know exactly what needs to be done and how it can be done. All that's needed is dialogue.
Pero sir, at the same time, the prices of sugar have been above 90 pesos per kilo since June. That's already 7 months. I think everybody's wondering. Everybody's wondering by after 7 months, siguro naman government has already figured out kung saan ang butas o kung saan yung lumaktaw. We're all trying to make sense of it. If to you the answer is so clear, exactly, the problem is also so clear, how come 7 months down the line we still don't have any resolution?
Yeah, and we need to remember also that because sugar policy passed by the Sugar Regulatory Administration, the prices of millgate prices for sugar have actually gone down by 26%.
Oh, okay.
You know, the peak was at 3,900 per bag. It is now down to less than 1,000 in some. So the prices have stepped downwards as far as producers are concerned.
Okay.
We're perplexed by the reality that retail prices have not followed the downward trend.
Sir, yung 3.9, sir, when was that? Yung millgate price of 3.9?
3.9.
When milling started in September,
okay,
because of lack of supply, prices spiked, but that was for a very brief period. I think a matter of 1 week or 2. And then prices started coming down as the new supply came in together with the importation allowed by the SRA.
So ano magiging impact na now? We imported 150,000 already and all of the stuff is already here now. Anong magiging impact ng 64,000 if yung 150,000 wala rin nangyari and we're already in the peak of the harvest and the milling? Anong impact ng 64,000 importation?
That's the whole point, Ami. No? The 64,000, first of all, is good for 10 to 11 days of consumption. It will not make a dent in the market. Second, the price of that sugar under MAV is going to be high also. It's not going to bring down the price. That's why we're saying it doesn't make sense to avail of MAV imports. No. On the other hand, we're saying if there is a reasonable suggested retail price that is enforced, then you will see the downward trend in retail prices. That's all that needs to be done.
In the meantime, we are at the start of the harvest season on sugar, as has been mentioned. Is there an additional risk here that as we enter the first quarter and as things hopefully normalize, that it will go beyond normalizing and we actually unleash a glut, in which case the farmers actually suffer from even lower prices by the time they finally get to market?
Well, first of all, there is not likely to be a glut, no, unless we over-import. Okay, the Philippine sugar industry is now expected to be about 1.8 million metric tons of sugar. That's against estimated demand of about 2.3 to 2.4 million.
Okay.
In other words, there is no avoiding importation. The question is, how much should we import, when do we import, and how do we allow the imports to in? This requires continuing dialogue between the policymakers, the producers, the stakeholders.
But you said mataas din ang sugar in the world market. Could you give us an idea kung how much we are spending for the importation? Given the currency exchange right now, given the situation outside the country?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that, Amy.
You mentioned na mataas din tayong magbabayad for the imports considering the foreign exchange situation, no, and the situation outside the country. So can you give us an idea how much we might be paying for these imports compared to local?
Okay. Today's world market sugar is priced $64 per ton, right?
Yes.
That translates to about 3,542 pesos per bag landed cost. Okay, that's only landed. Then you have to handling, transport, repacking, distribution, profit chains, etc. You're actually talking of about ending up with about 100 pesos per bag, or rather per kilo, equivalent.
Importation?
Meaning, does not make any sense to bring in sugar via the MAV route. It will cost too much. It makes no sense.
Okay.
Ang mahal nun.
Well, anyway, that's all the time we have, unfortunately, on this topic. Mr. Cosculluela, maraming salamat po.
Yes, thank you also. And good evening to everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Magandang gabi po sa inyo.
Thank you.
Mr. Lito Cosculluela is the former Sugar Regulatory Administration Chief. And we will start up another conversation after this break. Keep it here on One News.
reports that the country remains at a 12.5% nationwide positivity rate for COVID-19. Nearly 1,200 new infections were logged on Saturday, bringing the active case count to 18,200.
And the World Health Organization has expressed concern over the COVID-19 surge in China. The WHO is now urging Beijing to fast-track its vaccination efforts, especially to the most vulnerable.
Although COVID is still there, we cannot forget the public health issues that we are, such as tuberculosis, HIV, flu, that are constant threats to public health. We are continuing to monitor the COVID and all its new variants. We have reminded the OH that there are other issues beyond COVID. And since COVID is more or less being managed, we have to put our attention back to public health issues that existed even before COVID.
Despite hard times, most Filipinos remain optimistic. A survey shows 51% expect improved life in the next 6 months. What drives the positive outlook of Filipinos? And joining us tonight is OCTA Research Fellow Professor Guido David. Sir, magandang gabi and welcome back to Chiefs.
Good evening, Professor.
Hi, good evening, the Chiefs and Robbie.
Good evening.
Ami, and
Sir.
yes.
Sir, optimistic ang outlook pero yung background ninyo, sir, malungkot ngayon. Bakit gano'n? Nasanay ako sa background nyo dati.
Naka-black kasi si Ami.
Papakuha sa passport.
Papakuha sa passport, sabi ni Robbie. Sir, anyway, well, most of the experts that we've heard from have talked about, not so good news for next year. The World Bank projects a possibility of recession next year, and then some economists we've talked about the peaking of inflation in the Philippines by the first quarter of next year. Yet your survey shows 51% are looking up for next year. What do you think accounts for this?
Well, I think Filipinos are generally optimistic, and siguro the perspective is that it's not gonna get worse because we're already in a difficult or challenging situation with the inflation and rising prices and everything. Siguro, we did not expect the war in Ukraine and Russia to last this long, and that has also impacted our economy. But I think part of it is COVID is more or less behind us, and I think that gives us Filipinos more optimism that we're gonna get back to the normal, and I think that's part of what's driving the optimism of Filipinos.
But Professor, syempre, obviously, 51% expecting improved life in the next 6 months. Looking back also, obviously there's an inevitable baseline effect there. We're coming from a very low low. But if you parse through the data and the indicators of quality of life, what objectively are people looking at that we can look at and say that, okay, notwithstanding the baseline effect, these are clear indicators that life is improving?
Well, of course, we're talking about respondents here, Robbie. So for respondents, they're usually looking at their situation, if their lives have improved, if they can buy things, if their salary has maybe increased, if they have more opportunities, or even at the basic level, if they're able to buy the food that they need, or if they're having difficulties with that. When we conducted the survey, some of the questions we asked, which we have released previously already, are some of their urgent personal concerns. And the number one personal concern, the top personal concerns are still related to health and access to basic goods and having a secure job. So I think these are the personal metrics when people respond to the surveys. Of course, when analysts look at the metrics, it's more technical. We're looking at GDP growth, And although the GDP has improved and we're projected to have an improvement in the GDP, the question is this an improvement compared to 2019? Because from 2019, the GDP has been set back because of the pandemic. So it's like, we're moving up the ladder or the stairs, but we went 3 steps down and now we're climbing out from those 3 steps down. So we're seeing an improvement, but it's not necessarily an improvement compared to 2019. So if we're going to be technical about the metrics, we have to definitely parse through some of these aspects. GDP, unemployment, etc. Aside from exchange rate, economic indicators. But I think most respondents answer it on a more personal or on a more basic level.
So the question now is the sustainability of the improvement in the quality of life, and you attributed part of it to, mukhang COVID is behind us, the economy is being revived. On the other hand, now we're seeing what's happening in China. Of course, it's a different situation now. Pero ang tanong ng mga tao, can this improvement in terms of the pandemic be reversed? Meron pa bang ganong chance? I'm sure you're talking about it within OCTA also, no?
Yes, Ami, and a lot of people are concerned about the situation in China. Although, when I look at the number of cases in China, what it's showing is that it's decreasing. So there's something that's not aligned, with what people are saying on the ground and what the official numbers are. So I'm not sure if the numbers are not being reported or if they're underreported or what's happening. But I can't make any conclusions yet because the trends are decreasing. But on the ground, they say that they're going to have possibly one of the worst surges that they're expecting. But of course, this is China, and they're sort of behind the COVID curve. What I mean is that because of their zero COVID policy, when they have tried to prevent COVID infections, but now it's catching up to their situation. The rest of the world has moved on because we did not have that policy. And now China's trying to fast track its, opening up its economy, and it's causing them this. I don't think we will be affected by as much because, like the rest of the world, we have already a sufficient wall of immunity. But of course, there's always a possibility that it can be reversed. But I think that possibility is small, and that possibility maybe will come from if China is experiencing a massive surge and a new variant comes out of it that is very different from the Omicron that we've seen so far, because the Omicron, as we know, is not very severe for vaccinated people, and that's why we're able to manage this, as the president said in the soundbite. But there's always a chance that something could happen. Everyone acknowledges that there's a possibility. We hope, of course, that it doesn't happen.
Well, by way of pandemic response, is there anything that you would like the government, you would like to see happening? Just to minimize the risks.
Well, one thing, we should fast-track the importation of and the approval of the new bivalent vaccines as a booster, because it's already available in the U.S. And many of my friends who are doctors, when they went to the U.S., they got themselves injected with a bivalent, and even some of the businessmen, I think some politicians as well. So this is one aspect, or one thing that I'd like to, I hope we can fast track. And of course, the CDC that the president announced in his SONA, that we'll have a Center for Disease Control for monitoring the disease, and not just COVID, but other diseases. We had reports about the hand, foot, and mouth disease. Flu season's always around the corner, or right now I think there's flu season, and then other diseases like those mosquito-driven diseases. So there's a lot of things that maybe we should be monitoring, and of course the other one aspect is the healthcare system. We should really scale it up and really inject some some investment into the healthcare system. So build, but also our personnel, the nurses, the frontline workers, we're losing some of them because they're going overseas. So we definitely need to, produce more healthcare workers.
Drilling down on your, and going back to your survey showing the optimism of Filipinos. One interesting thing is if you break it down per region, tama ba yung basa ko? Visayas seems to be the most optimistic region. And then comes Luzon, and then comes Mindanao. What accounts for, these differences?
Yeah, Robbie, normally there would be some regional differences in terms of, but it's usually within the margin of error. So if it's plus minus 3%, it's not usually a big deal. But here we're seeing Visayas has 60% optimism. Unfortunately, we didn't ask the question, as to the reason they're optimistic. And but we're also seeing a slightly lower optimism for socioeconomic class A, B, and C. Why are people in Visayas more optimistic, and why are people in Mindanao less optimistic? Because 18% of the respondents in Mindanao said the situation will be worse, and there could be regional disparities, and I think there's still some armed conflict in some parts of Mindanao. I don't know, maybe it's the nature of people from Visayas. Maybe they're more, optimistic, easygoing. But I haven't looked at other data from previous years. So I'm not sure how to account for this difference in optimism. But this is something, Robbie, that we plan to monitor over the next year so that we can compare with the previous data, and we can see if there's going to be an increase in optimism. Let's remember that the administration's just in its first 6 months, they haven't really fully implemented the programs that they want to implement. So, rating the administration so far has been based on the promises and the platform that were presented by the administration. So we'll see next year if there is any improvement in the performance ratings and the optimism of our countrymen.
Speaking of the optimism and speaking of your earlier survey showing high approval ratings for the Marcos administration, would you say that the data, even to this latest survey, still effectively reflect the baseline sentiment for the Marcos administration? In other words, are we still in a honeymoon phase?
I think so, Robbie. Definitely that we're still in a honeymoon phase because, like I said, it's we conducted the survey just after the first 100 days of the administration, so it's still mostly just the platform and the promises. They haven't worked on their own budget. I mean, they have a bigger budget now for next year, and by next year we'll see how they will be operating on their new on the administration's own budget. So it's definitely within the honeymoon phase, and people probably are giving them more, I would say more slack, but people are being patient with what they're going to be seeing, and then maybe next year we will see if there are changes in the response of the respondents.
Sir, what about in terms of? Go ahead, Ami.
Sige.
What about in terms of socioeconomic classes? I think Class D was the highest in terms of optimism, going down Class E and then ABC. What accounts for that, do you think?
Well, sometimes those from ABC, I don't know, they're maybe more critical or they have more access to information. So sometimes it might be that they know something, or maybe I think economic class D and E, some of them may be more optimistic because they might be foreseeing more opportunities for themselves. I noted that for A, B, and C, the pessimism is at 15%, so it's the highest among the three classes, whereas for D and E it's 10 and 9%. So I'm also looking at the pessimism because although the optimism is, as we said, very high, but it's still really only about half, and the other half is you can't say that they're pessimistic, but a lot of them are saying that the situation will be the same. So for me, that's also slightly pessimistic if we're not foreseeing or projecting an improvement in the situation.
Professor, OCTA also conducted surveys on trust and performance of the President and Vice President Sara Duterte. No? Can you tell us more about it? Kasi ang taas-taas ng mga ratings nila. No? Can you give us more details in possible basis for the trust?
Yes, Abby. For the trust and the approval ratings, yes, you're correct. Mataas for the president and the vice president. I think they have about 79 and 80% approval or performance ratings. So that's actually pretty high. But I think usually, was mentioned, we're still in the honeymoon phase. So they're definitely giving more slack to the to our elected officials, and we'll see how it goes over the next year if there's going to be improvement. I think some of the other past presidents, they had initially very high approval rating. I think President Duterte had something like in the 90s in his first year, and it even carried on until the later years.
Professor, could I ask a question about OCTA, if you don't mind?
Sure.
No, only because, in the past couple of years, looking back, people really got to know OCTA. You've become a household brand because of COVID. And people actually mistake you for COVID experts, where in fact you're really into data, you're really into getting a pulse on the public. Then during the elections, which has also ended, we got to know you for your political surveys as well, social insights, socioeconomic insights and surveys. I'm just wondering, as we quote-unquote emerge, hopefully, in some sort of a post-COVID year, and certainly it's not an election period next year, I'm just wondering, what are the questions or new questions that you think OCTA would like to look at, or new ways of looking at Philippine sentiment? What are some questions and new framings that you'd be interested in 2023?
Actually, that's that's a very loaded question, Robbie, and there are a lot of interesting new ways we can frame questions. Right now, we've been going on mostly questions that are normally asked even by other survey companies, and of course, we want to sort of distinguish ourselves from other survey firms because, although Professor Ranjit is a political analyst, I'm more of a data person, and for me, I'm just really looking at data and sharing information, and that's the point of it. There are questions that we are, looking at, and we're also mapping the trends. And this is also very important, trends for example, when we looked at COVID concern or the government response to COVID, we see that it's already now at 91% approval, whereas back in the time of during the Delta surge last year, around September 2021, it was around 55% only, so it was at its lowest. And people are really, they're really looking at what they're feeling on the ground. But I think aside from looking at trends, there are definitely some questions that we want to ask, but I'm not sure if I can, give away some of the plans that we're looking at. But definitely, maybe it's sort of looking at data in a different way. Because in COVID, what we realized is that it's not just looking at the data now, but also projecting into the future. And this is something that I think is very important. How we can project data into the future. Some of these sentiments, how we can project that into the future.
Sir, babalik ko lang dun sa CDC. Just in case it is set up, magkakaroon ka ng participation ng OCTA because you've been, well, I think people have relied on OCTA for reliable projections, no, on disease trends. Kung sakasakali, will there be a participation of OCTA in CDC services?
Well, we'll see, Ami. That would be interesting. I mean, of course, OCTA always offers its help to the public and also to the government to work with. So we will see if they, would need our services. But if not, we'll just continue to do what we've been doing, more like an independent monitoring research group.
But would you be willing to be part of what it will be a state facility, of course? Would you be willing to be part of well, of course, you're part of UP now, but that's different. Would you be willing to be part of the CDC?
Yeah, that would be something that can be discussed. I mean, I'm definitely open to working with them on the monitoring because that's one of my specialties. In fact, that's probably closer to my specialization than doing survey data analysis. But the survey data is there, so I just have to present it. But monitoring diseases is something that I feel is closer to my heart.
Okay, Professor Guido David, as always, maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Salamat. Yes, and Merry Christmas.
Maligayang Pasko. Maligayang Pasko po.
Maligayang Pasko.
And that is it for the Chiefs. We hope it was discussed. We'll keep the conversation going. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.